Okay, let's start again. Um, my name is Rebecca Payo. I'm with the Colorado Office of Attorney Professional Excellence, and you are at the first 90 days succeeding in your first legal job. Our panel will be discussing the transition from law school into practice, and especially the first 90 days. A few housekeeping tips. We will be in webinar mode, so we can't see or hear attendees. So we can't help you if you have tech issues. Usually we find that if something does happen, you can log out and log back in, and usually that takes care of things. A recording will be available later today on our social media channels. And there will be one general CLE credit, and I will put the course ID number in the chat as we round up towards the end. Our panelists today are Amy Devan, Deputy Circuit Executive of the U.S. Court of Appeals of the 10th Circuit, Katie Meyer-Jensen, Professional Development Manager with Holland and Hart, and Emily Sheldon, the Principal Liaison of the Davis-Graham Partnership, overseeing attorney talent and management strategy at Davis-Graham. And I will leave it up to our panelists to do their introductions. Amy, would you like to kick it off?
Thanks, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited about this CLE today. I think we're going to have a really exciting conversation. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is Amy Devan. I'm the Deputy Circuit Executive with they're all blending, with the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. I previously did work for the state of Colorado at the Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel, and I've held various roles in private practice, most recently with the law firm of Wheeler Trigg O'Donnell as the Executive Director.
Emily, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Sheldon. I'm the Chief Legal Talent Officer at Davis-Graham. As Rebecca said, I am focused on recruiting and professional development, and I also work really closely with the firm's partnership and our executive committee on various special projects and things that the firm has going on. I am actually not an attorney. I've always been on this side of things, but just wrapped up last year, I think my 16th or 17th summer program, so have seen a lot of Colorado attorneys matriculate through our programs, and I'm excited to chat with you all today.
And
Katie?
sure. As Rebecca mentioned, I'm Katie Meyer-Jensen, the Professional Development Manager at Holland and Hart. Like Emily, I am also not a practicing attorney, but I have been on the PD side of things in law firms. This is now my 13th year at Holland and Hart, and so have been heavily involved in substantive and professional skills training for our associates, career development, mentorship, roles like that. And I'm very excited to be here to talk with you all today.
Great. And just as a reminder, I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So if you have any questions, we'll be taking them as they come. So feel free to participate and bring us your insights and questions. So we'll get started. Let's start with the reality check from law school versus practice. My first question is, what does law school prepare new lawyers to do reasonably well? And where does it leave the biggest gaps once you're actually practicing? Amy, how would you like to start us off?
So I will start us off just by clarifying the part I left out of my intro, which is that I am a lawyer. And so I have both personal experience with this transition as well as professional experience mentoring and supervising lawyers who were making this transition. And I think I'd say the most obvious thing is that law school prepares you to think like a lawyer. Law school gives you legal training, law school gives you concepts, but what law school doesn't do and really can't do is teaches you then how to put that into play and be a lawyer. How do you sit across from a client for the first time and represent that client? How do you convey to that client that you have the competence to handle their matter and that they should put their trust in you at a time when they're not in a great moment? I always tell people, I go to the dentist to get checkups and I want the dentist to tell me everything's fine and send me on my way. People don't come to lawyers for checkups. People come to lawyers because they're in some kind of a crisis. They're getting sued. They're getting divorced. They're suing someone else. Something has gone wrong. They're in a landlord-tenant dispute. There's something wrong that is what bringing someone to a lawyer. And so you need to be able to convey to them that you understand that and that they are in safe hands. But also you need to serve your internal customers, the partners, the stakeholders in your organization, whatever organization that is. And law school doesn't necessarily prepare you for that. That's really an on the ground, I'm putting what I've learned and the conceptual now into play in the practical. Emily and Katie, what do you see on the ground?
I really agree with all of that, Amy. I think that we often talk about here that learning how to be a lawyer is a true apprenticeship opportunity. And to your point, I think that law school gives you the tools that you need to think like a lawyer. But I think it's really impossible to learn how to become one until you're actually doing all of the things that you just described. I think that the other piece is just sort of the general professionalism, and there are so many different mechanics that go into being a lawyer, particularly if you're on the law firm side, like living your life by the billable hour and tracking your time and being responsive to emails and all of those sorts of things that I think go into what makes somebody ultimately successful in their career.
Katie,
I think that's absolutely right. Katie, I just want to jump in real quick and then I'll turn it over to you. But one of the things that I talk to young lawyers about, and I know we have licensed legal professionals on this call too, is really looking at yourself as a brand. Like you are your own commodity. What you embody is what you're selling. And whether you're selling that to partners as, I can be your go-to person, or you're selling that to clients, depending on your firm size, whether you're in a nonprofit or in a government setting, you're your product, you're your brand. And so thinking about what do you want that to look like? And how are you going to bring that to fruition?
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree with all that's being said here. And I think as Emily mentioned, it really is an apprenticeship. And so some of those skills that you are learning, like how to effectively communicate via email, what the partner is asking of you, you really can't learn those until you're in this position, right? You can learn all the legal analysis and how to write effectively and all of those things, but it is kind of nuanced once you're actually in the role. And I think you really just need to keep that maybe like learning hat on as you
Mhm.
come into the practice and know that that's what you're still doing within those first 90 days for sure.
I think that's absolutely right. And I would say, even apart from your first 90 days, and Emily in particular, you can speak to this, it's also when you're looking for the role, right? And it's really, how am I transitioning from being, I had a camp mentee at one point, back when it was the Colorado Attorney Mentoring Program, solely, who really wanted to do a certain type of role, but was really struggling out of law school, even though had great grades and was top of class, was struggling with landing that role. And in part, it was because of that person's demeanor when sitting across from an interviewer. And how do I make eye contact? How do I convey confidence? How do I convey that while I'm here to learn, I can also bring value? And so I think that's part of the transition too, is just seeing yourself in that role, knowing what that role is, and then recognizing the value you bring to it.
So going on that apprenticeship theme, many new lawyers assume competence is expected on day one. How should new attorneys really think about competence in the first 90 days? Emily, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I gave a lot of thought to this question, actually. I think it's a great one. I think that when new attorneys start at firms, which is really the perspective that I have, we are looking for people who know how to research and can write and do those types of things, which I think get polished over time. We don't expect those things to be perfect right out of the gate, but the intangible skills that we're looking for that I think really define success are, can somebody come in and really demonstrate that they want to be a part of the team? Can they show that they have an interest in the bigger picture of what they're working on? Can they ask thoughtful questions that show that they're not just thinking about the narrow project that they've just been given, but how that project fits into the bigger picture of what they're working on. Do they have curiosity about that? So I think it's just showing, like I said, that you want to be part of the team, that you want a bigger piece of things. And I also think when you first start, it can be a little slow as you're getting integrated and people are feeling out what your skill set is and what resources you might need. I think the other really big piece of success is showing that you're willing to knock on doors and make yourself available and that you have a little bit of grit for trying to make sure that your plate is full and that you're willing to ask for more.
Emily, I want to piggyback on that. I have really started emphasizing as I've been in leadership roles for the past 10 years or so, looking for grit, hiring for grit, right? Like, I don't expect you to know everything. I can teach you, but do you want to do it? Do you have the hustle? And I think that's really important. And I will tell you, so I have worked for various government organizations. I've worked in private firms, both as a practicing lawyer and not. And now, of course, I work for the federal judiciary. And in every one of those entities, it was really showing up and really being present in the moment. And I think the managing partner at Wheeler Trigg, when I was there, used to say that the opportunities are presented by showing up, by knocking on doors, like Emily said, and by showing that you have the grit and you may not know all the things. It's better that you don't have preconceived notions about all the things, but you're ready to learn them. Katie, what do you think?
I absolutely agree with that. And I was going to say, we don't expect you to know everything on day one. And so I think part of that is understanding that and coming to the table, maybe acknowledging what you don't know, and asking the questions and then getting more granular with your actual work, being reliable on the things that you've been assigned, communicating effectively, asking smart questions. And what I mean by that is like you put some thought into it before you asked it. You're not just asking, what should I research? You're asking, hey, I think I'm going to research this. Is that the right track? It shows that willingness to learn and that you want to be there and that grit, I think that you're talking about, Amy.
Katie, to that point too, we often talk here about also making use of all of the other resources that you have available to you. So in mind,
Mhm.
for an associate who has just started, if they do have a lot of questions, maybe it's not going back to the partner who's given them the assignment to really dig in and ask the really granular questions, which you should be asking. I think that that's also a sign of success, but figuring out like who is another associate who is more senior than I am, who has worked a lot with this partner, who could maybe help me navigate this, or if there are more procedural questions, who is my partner's assistant? Could I sit down with them for a few minutes to understand things? I think it's just sort of activating everything that's available to you so that maybe you can go back to the partner and say, so I talked to this associate and I talked to your assistant and I got all of this information and can you maybe just help me analyze these last couple of questions that I have? I feel like without fail, that is such an impressive path to take, and people appreciate the um, kind of gumption that it takes to figure that out without just asking the resource that's right in front of you.
I think that's so right, Emily. And I think also I have a newer lawyer that I've been working with on an informal basis who doesn't work with me, but working with on a mentor level. And this person conveys back to the partners a lot, but I'm still learning. Like, thank you for that feedback. I'm still learning. And there's a point where that conversation starts to become problematic, right? Like,
Mhm.
you've been here a while and your responses to everything is that you're still learning. And while on some level that's expected and understood, there's also a lot that you should now know. And so this person in particular wasn't understanding really the political savvy nature of it, which I have in my notes as like, be savvy, recognize like, what are you conveying with the conversations that you're having, and go into those conversations conveying, I've taken ownership of this. I've demonstrated mastery of understanding, communicating, and I'm trying to solve for myself before I come to you, rather than just sitting back and saying, I'm still learning. Because at some point that conveys to the partner that you're not grasping it, or that there's a lack of competence over time. So it's really being savvy and saying, I'm going to look to other sources of information. It's not just this one person.
I think that's really important too, Amy, just in terms of progressing throughout your career and showing where you have gained competence in certain areas. Because if you're continually saying to yourself, but I'm still learning, you can sometimes fall into this space where you're not acknowledging where you have excelled and where you do have the skills. And so then you're not as good of an advocate for yourself or for your clients. It could, come to that too. So I think it's really important to acknowledge where you have gained the knowledge and expertise when you have.
That's a great point.
So what are some of the most common mistakes you see new lawyers make in their first few months? And which ones are easiest to fix early? Katie, you want to take that one?
Sure. I think the most common one I see is truly maybe not understanding the scope of the assignment given to them, whether that's how much time it should take, truly what they should be focusing on, and then not asking the follow-up questions, or they're waiting too long to ask the follow-up questions. And I do think some of that stems from maybe a little bit of fear that you're taking the time of someone who is really important, who needs to be focusing on someone else or something else. But you can't do good work if you don't know what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So you should be taking the time to ask the questions, clarify the assignment, clarify what you need to get done and when.
I think to piggyback on that, lawyers can be very good at giving feedback, but I think sometimes they need to be asked for it. So I think the final step in that progression is making sure that you are advocating for yourself a little bit. And if you're hearing crickets after you've finished something, make sure that you are asking for the feedback. What did I do well on this? What should I do differently next time? I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, particularly on the firm side, this is a totally client service driven industry. I think that translates to just kind of general availability and making sure that you're being really responsive to both your internal and external clients. And I think that can be a little bit of a system shock probably in the first 90 days. But I think to what Amy said earlier about building your brand and what do you want to be conveying to other people, I think that I would want to be known when I first start out as somebody who is incredibly responsive, who is incredibly dependable. That when somebody reaches out to me, even if I can't immediately get the project done, just acknowledging that you've received it, give a timeline for when you do think that you'll be able to get it done. I think that you want people to see you as, like I said earlier, a really great teammate that they can reach out to and that you're there for them.
And communicate. Both of you had that thread, and I think that's critical. And it's funny because that's been a thread, I think, throughout my career. When I was with the Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel, investigating lawyer complaints, almost every single complaint I investigated had at its root communication. And had communication just been better, even if you're communicating a bad outcome, the client probably would have never complained. And my dearly beloved boss, who was regulation counsel for the state of Colorado, John Gleason, always used to say, I would love it if you would be both smart and competent as well as nice. But if you can only be one, be nice. Because if you're nice and you communicate and you are understanding of what your client needs, whether it's internal or external, a lot more is going to go your way, where you can be the most smart, competent person in the world. But if you're not communicating, if you're abrasive, if you're not listening, things can go south. And I, at various times, would counsel associates when I was with my law firms. And one of the conversations that I literally had to have out loud with a couple was stop talking and start listening. Talk less, listen more, and communicate when it's appropriate to communicate. and communicate, as both Emily and Katie said, early, not late.
Amy, I've got a question for you, and you've touched on this. So what are some practical ways to read the unwritten rules of a workplace without stepping on landmines?
The third rail. I think the biggest thing, and what I always, no matter what organization I'm in, I counsel people, and I try to follow this myself, is step back at first and observe. And, engage, don't go into a shell, but observe more than you contribute. Listen more than you talk. Understand the dynamics of what's going on around you. Understand the dynamics of what is expected of you, because then your contributions will be knowledgeable and more meaningful. And back to Katie's point earlier of like, don't ask questions just to ask them, but ask thoughtful questions. You can do that once you've taken the time to digest your surroundings. I read this great article just over the weekend, and I think it was in the Harvard Business Review, about what do highly successful people all have in common. And the common thread was adaptability, the ability to listen and the ability to adapt, the ability to understand the circumstances around them and to meet the moment. And I'll use the word savvy again, to be savvy about the circumstances. And you can only do that if you take your time, settle in, take a breath, and absorb where you are in the moment.
I would just chime in to say too, I think this is a space where you can really rely on your peers and colleagues that have been in this space before and ask those questions that you might think that's something I probably should not ask the partner, but I really need to know. Or I would also say here, don't forget about the legal support professionals because, as a professional development manager, I can share some of that insight. Our legal assistants have often worked with their partners for 20 plus years. They can share some of those things. So just find those groups of people that you can ask those questions of, and also, to reiterate Amy's point, observe what's going on around you before you act, and just take all that in and digest it.
I always
Right.
tell people I'm the safe space. Like I used to do that when I was the executive director, when I was with the state, now here as deputy circuit executive. I'll tell people I would rather you come to me because I don't, I didn't have a partnership vote, but I knew the rules of the road. So come to me and ask the crazy thing because I can help keep you from making a misstep. And I do the same thing here. It's like, let me absorb it. I won't hold it against you, and I'll help steer you the right way.
Emily, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Don't think so. I guess maybe the one thing I would say is I do think that this is where you should rely on others. I think to Amy's point, the professional teams are a great resource. I think too, it's good to observe kind of what, if you're in a firm, which other associates you should be relying on. And I think that you should be looking for some key things like, is this somebody that is working with a number of partners? Is this somebody who maybe the firm has tapped to sit on a committee or has a leadership position of some kind? I just think that you want to be thoughtful about who you're kind of relying on for the inside track and make sure that it's somebody who it appears the firm has put a lot of trust in.
Great.
That's a great point.
Great, Emily. So if a new lawyer can only focus on 3 priorities in their first 90 days, what should they be and what can wait?
I would say visibility, responsiveness, and relationship building. I think everything else can wait. And we sort of expect everything else to wait, to be honest.
I like that. I wrote down, get your foundation solid, figure out how you work best, how to manage your time, and start to get a feel for the work, which I think is along the lines, Emily, of yours. I just think it's, the whole point of this discussion today is how to start being a legal professional. And I think that's the foundation.
Yeah, I don't know as if I would have said anything different than Amy or Emily. I maybe would just add, I mean, learn the or whatever organizational setting you're in, the systems that you need to be successful. So if you're billing your time in 6-minute increments, learn how to do that effectively from day one because that's really important. Find a time management or organizational system that works for you. And then you can more easily put more time into focusing on the actual work product, being reliable, building those relationships.
Like, how are you going to do this?
Hmm.
And you have to figure it out. I think you're right, Katie. You have to figure it out for yourself. Like, I always give people the example. When I rolled into law school day one, everyone was already doing these note cards. Like, and I was like, what is with the note cards? Like, everyone had the note cards. And first of all, we just got here. I don't even know how you know about the note cards. And I don't know what you're writing on the note cards. And so I went and got some note cards and I tried to do the note cards and the note cards just never worked for me. And I jettisoned it early because it was like, that's just never going to work for me. And I think it's understanding that at each stage, right? That was law school, but then the same is true of lawyering and of representing clients at, whatever your legal professional role is like what's actually going to work for you? What are you actually going to use? And not everything that everyone else does is going to work for you. So figuring out your method, but actually figuring it out is key.
Mhm. So let's pivot to building credibility and effective communication. Amy, so you've touched on, all three of you have touched on this, but how do you recommend new lawyers handle mistakes in a way that builds trust rather than damages it?
Own it. Just you got to own it. It's nothing, and I want to hear about it from you. I don't want you to sit back and hope no one notices. We talked when we were thinking about this session there, about ethics, and that potentially comes in later, but that comes in here too. Like, if you've encountered a problem, you've made a mistake, you got to realize really quickly, are there ethical implications? Are there client implications? Are there relationship implications? And if you recognize the mistake, recognize quickly what you think the solutions are, and then come to me, and I'm saying me hypothetically, but come to me and tell me, I realize this thing. Here's how I think it happened. Here's the solution to it. Here are the ways that I've learned from it, and I'm going to be sure it doesn't happen again. In fact, it's funny. I just read a post on LinkedIn this morning where a now law firm owner said that he had a moment early in his career when a partner should have fired him because he drafted the brief, did all the things, and then filed it with the wrong case caption. And he noticed it. And he went to the partner right away and said, I've noticed it. I have already figured out how to fix it. I just want you to know I'm very sorry. And the partner looked at him and said, mistakes happen. Don't let it happen again. Right? Like that same mistake. And then a year later, he made a different mistake and he took the same approach. And his partner trusted that he would always come to him, but that he would come to him in a proactive way by self-identifying the complaint, by handling it quickly, and by owning the fix. And he said he had a long working relationship with that partner that was very productive because he owned it and took care of it right at the outset.
I think that perfectly summarizes that question. I think the longer you sit on something, the more it grows and grows. So I think you just have to be really quick to call out when something has gone wrong. I think it's also not a bad idea to go to somebody and say, I'm worried about XYZ thing. Was this a mistake? Like this maybe didn't sit right with me, and I would love a gut check on if I did this the right way. I think that that is such a great way to build trust, and I think um, gives people the reassurance that when you are doing work for them, that you will be steadfast in making sure that it's as high quality as it needs to be.
Mhm.
Katie, do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. I think Amy and Emily summed that up really well.
And
So
don't overpromise and underdeliver. That's like, be realistic. Don't promise you can do it in 2 days if you really can't do it in 2 days, especially if it's not even due for 5 days. Like, be thoughtful, promise what you can actually deliver, and build trust that way too. That's critical for me, I think.
So how often should new lawyers be providing status updates, and what makes an update helpful rather than annoying? Katie, do you want to lead on that?
Yeah, so to be honest, I think it probably depends on what the original ask was of the assignment, right? And what the preferences are of the person who has given it to you. So ask that question. You know, the deadline is in 4 days. Would you like me to follow up with you in two? And just get a sense of what they would like there. I would also say if you've been given an assignment, say it's a research assignment, and they have said this should take 5 hours, and all of a sudden you're on hour three and you're still struggling and you don't know if you're going in the right direction, that's a good time to stop and think, hey, I need some more guidance here. You don't want to wait until you've hit that limit before you say, I think, I'm not on the right track and I need some more help. So again, I'm sorry I don't have like a, every 2 days kind of answer for you, but I do think it really depends, and just be proactive about them. And probably something more than, yes, I'm still working on it. Give some more substance to the update.
I agree. I think that this is another relationship building opportunity, and whomever your supervisor is at the outset, asking what their preferences are for follow-up and status updates and all kinds of things. I mean, we've even been having conversations here about talking to supervising attorneys about vacation time, and every different person that you work with is going to have a different preference for how that gets communicated. And do they want you to put a calendar hold on their calendar showing when you're going to be out? Do they want a reminder email a few days before? How do they want you to help set up any coverage that you're going to need? I think there's so many different preferences that people have, and part of the professionalism that you learn once you actually start in this career is having those relationships with the people that you're working with so that you can ask these questions, and then kind of moderating what you do for each person once you understand what their preferences are, which I actually think is really good practice for client service. And once you have your own clients, recognizing that every different person that you work with externally is also going to have their own preferences. So it's really a game of asking those questions, keeping track of what people say, and then delivering on that.
Don't assume. I think, again, the root of communication, as you both highlighted, and as you said, Emily, it's really, that's part of professional growth, is having those conversations, understanding how to have those conversations, understanding everyone's going to want something different, and you can't just assume. And 100% agree with your comment about cutting your teeth really toward client service, because that's really what this is. Really throughout your career, your customers are as much internal as they are external. But in the beginning of your career, you don't have many external customers. So understanding it's a customer service occupation at the end of the day. We're all customer service. And so it's really understanding how to meet their needs that ensures your success.
So Emily, I'm sorry, did I interrupt? You're
No.
good. Okay, good. How can new lawyers balance being personable with maintaining appropriate professional boundaries?
What a great question. I think it's probably letting the other person lead a little bit more. And to Amy's point, more of the listening and less of the talking at first. And if somebody is really opening up to you, I think that you can sort of match how much they're opening up. I do think that this is a fine line. I think that the longer you're with an organization, probably the less of a thing this becomes. But initially, I don't think you want to be an oversharer. So I do think that it's just kind of reading the room and like I said, matching what other people are doing. Amy, Katie, disagree?
No,
Don't disagree.
I don't disagree. I definitely think that that's the right approach. And I guess I would just say that you want your clients, which are probably the more senior attorneys you're working with, to trust your judgment. So if you're bringing conversation to the table that might make someone question that, it's probably not the right conversation to be having. So.
And I actually had this experience with a mentee who led our relationship with really personal information, life outlook, and political, sensibilities. Which right now I get it. It like we're living in a time of a lot of, competing dialogues coming at us, and so it was tempting, I think, for this person to bond over that, but we had to have a few conversations and involve the organization that I was mentoring through in some of the conversations about what are appropriate conversations to be having in a professional context, because that is what this is. And I recently had a conversation with someone about that, about there are certain things that you don't necessarily want to tell the person who's writing a review of you, right? And that's just real, even if you like that person. And there are certain things that you have to recognize, that as much as we want to show up and bring our authentic selves to our workplace, it is our workplace. And there are a lot of different people here, in whatever the organization that we're trying to get along with, who have different notions about life and other things. And you don't want the alienating to be on the overshare when you haven't even had a chance to prove yourself as a professional, right? Because no matter who you are, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're legal support staff, whether you're a licensed legal professional, like no matter who you are, you've invested in this, and you've invested in this career, and don't have the fact that you overshared something that probably didn't have a place in a professional setting be the thing that derails you.
Wonderful. So let's pivot to managing workload and developing professional habits. Katie, let's start with you. What organization, actually, let's do this one. How can new lawyers realistically manage work coming from multiple supervisors without burning bridges?
I would say transparency is key here. Like you need to be transparent with those that are assigning you work, what other priorities you have in your queue for whatever period of time you think is appropriate. And so I would also say, in our firm anyway, your supervisor can be an immediate support for that. You can talk to them about like, hey, I have XYZ on my plate right now, but this partner just asked me to take on this thing. Can you help me figure out how to either one, fit that into my current workload, or how to respond in a way that doesn't burn the bridges with that partner, which could be something like, I have, these two deadlines due this Friday. Can this work next week? And maybe the answer is no, and that's okay. And you could also offer to help them find another associate, or someone else to assist with that work. But I really, again, we've been talking about communication this whole time. You have to communicate what is on your plate, or nobody else can help you prioritize it either.
Emily, do you have anything to add?
I totally agree with that. I also think to the extent you are in your first 90 days, and I don't know, let's say that the opportunity that comes up is with somebody that you've really been wanting to work with and you want to impress them, I think also just pushing yourself a little bit is not a terrible idea. Even if it means maybe a late night or two to get the work product over the finish line. I completely agree with Katie that if you are like absolutely overextended and you just simply can't take on another thing in that moment, that's absolutely the way that you should handle it. But again, if it's maybe staying until like 7 or 8 o'clock one night to demonstrate that you are willing to kind of go above and beyond to do something for somebody that you're interested in working with, I think that that is not a terrible reputation to have right out of the gate.
I think that's right. And the other thing I think is, um, we can acknowledge the sort of unspoken here, which is that a lot of partners have practiced law for a long time, and a lot of them are going to say, I never turned down work. Like I took all the work and I did all the work and all the things. And so I think it's recognizing that dynamic that even as firms and legal organizations in general start to try to embrace lifestyle balance, there's still this tenor of we do a hard thing and it's in demand and it needs to get done. And no one promised you 8 to 5. And so it's really understanding that, you don't want to take on so much that you're not successful at what you produce, right? Because then that's its own problem. But is it that you truly can't take it on, or is it that it just means you might have to move a few plans and, as Emily said, work a little longer to get that project accomplished, and to recognize that that's going to happen. I mean, I worked with partners at the firm I was with who would say, I don't even know how to turn on the out of office on Outlook, or I haven't taken a true vacation in years where I haven't worked. That's not necessarily what we aspire to, but that's the population that you're dealing with, especially if you're working in law firms or in in-house legal departments. Um, and so it's important to recognize that and to understand that you may have to reformulate your ideas around what you're willing to give, just like with an external client, right? If you have an external client that you're very invested in, and for example, for the licensed legal professionals on the call, if it's a domestic relations client and they've had something come up and it needs to be addressed right away because there's a custody dispute on the line, or a handoff on a custody, whatever it might be, that might also require like not cutting off right at 5, right? And so it's understanding that there are certain times you have to have the conversation and you have to think about how to have it properly, but then there's other times where you might just have to figure out how to make it work.
Well, this kind of follows up on that. So what unhealthy habits tend to form in the first year that later contribute to burnout?
So I talked to an associate once who was getting married, and the associate said, I said, do not work on your honeymoon. Like, don't do that. And this associate said to me, but it's like an 8-hour flight. What am I going to do on the flight? And I was like, be like a normal person. Watch the movie on the flight, or read a book, or, remember how to be a normal person too, right? Understand that there's a whole lot of life out there. I'm going to take a moment to make an unpaid, I'm not compensated for this plug, but I read the best book that really reframed how I think about work and my relationship with work. And it was called The Good Enough Job. Actually, Ryan Payton recommended it to me. And it really it was life-changing for me, in that the premise of the book is we have to think about not over glamorizing overwork, and understand that the good enough job is the job that pays you well, that you feel fulfilled by, that allows you to seek what you're seeking professionally, but that also allows you to be a whole person outside of it. And understanding that that whole person outside of it allows you to then be freer to bring your best self to it, and finding that balance. And I recognize that this might be inconsistent, given that I just said sometimes you have to work late and sometimes you do, but you also should be doing those things with an eye toward discrete successes, while also realizing I've got to be a whole person separate and apart from this, and I have to figure out who that person is, because then I can be my most successful self here too. And it's important to find that.
Katie, do you have anything to add?
Um, I guess another unhealthy habit I tend to see is like bringing what I kind of call the perfectionism state from being in law school, where you're like the drive to always be that A+ student. And so then you get into actual legal practice and you're not getting grades on everything. And this is more of a team project than it is anything. And sometimes I think like putting yourself always up to this bar, like that's a good thing to strive for, but recognizing that sometimes that can also too be unhealthy and contribute to you feeling unhappy because you're feeling like you're never hitting it, right?
Yeah.
So set some realistic goals for and expectations for yourself so you don't contribute to your own burnout in that way.
That's
Emily?
especially true at firms like you guys are in because you're recruiting, um, lawyers who have been highly successful in previous legal jobs or in law firms and or in law school, and we're like maybe big fish in little ponds, but this is a different pond, and there's a lot of people here who were big fish in their pond.
Yeah, I think to that point, one thing that we see, because everybody has largely been very successful their whole lives when they start here, is it can be very hard to come in with a growth mindset when it comes to feedback. And as
Yeah.
we've said, this is an apprenticeship profession. We expect that there is going to be course correction and that we will be helping you to form into the amazing attorney that you're going to be one day. There will be some bumps in the road along the way. Nobody comes out of law school and just perfectly knows how to practice. So I think one healthy habit to adopt is being open to feedback, seeing it as potential for growth, seeing it as your organization investing in you, and not allowing it to sort of chip it away at your confidence, which I think can be a little bit of a trap. I think that if people are taking the time to help you develop, they are investing in you, they want you to be successful, and figuring out how to absorb that in a really productive way will, I think, help with some of the mental downfall that can come from getting feedback regularly.
And I will say, Emily, that is 100% as the person who often had to give that difficult feedback and still does. I have told people like it would be so easy for me just to not say this, right? And it would be easy for me to let you go on continuing to think that this was fine, but that's doing you a disservice, right? Like I want you to be have your best chance of success. And I told our partners all the time, sometimes relationships just don't work. Sometimes this workplace isn't the right place for people, and that's okay. Um, but if we can't look in the mirror and say that we gave them the opportunity to understand where things weren't working and give them the chance to fix it, then we failed, right? And so I think it's a two-way street. It's understanding that when people are taking that approach to give you that feedback, it's not to devastate you or just to be mean. It's really to help you be the best legal professional you can be.
I would agree with that. And I think I would just also add that, when you are receiving feedback, you shouldn't look at it as like it being like an attack on you as an individual person. It is about your skill development. We want you to be a better writer, for example, in these specific ways, or we want you to, develop communication skills in a different way. And it does sometimes feel that way. You get on the offense like, oh my gosh, I'm not a good lawyer, and all, you go down, spiral downhill from there. But it really is, as Amy mentioned, like for your own personal development. And it is not about you as the person. It is about your skills.
So, what professional development activities pay the biggest dividends early in a legal career? Katie?
I would say getting involved in like your bar organizations, especially like the Young Lawyers Division. Those are great. Taking or presenting CLEs in your practice area. Um, Another example might be like a writing opportunity. Often our attorneys at Holland and Hart will write blog posts about a specific area of law, something like that. Those are good PD opportunities.
Emily?
I agree with those suggestions. I think kind of the overarching theme to look for when you're first starting out is what can I be involved in that could potentially yield some good mentorship for me. I think that all of those activities are really about relationship building in addition to honing your skill set. And I think that if you can go into it with that mindset and find people who can help you develop and be a resource for you, and as you're navigating your career, somebody that you can reach out to regularly, that's a total win.
And I think be humble and be open to it, be open to, I will take any opportunity that's presented to me because I know my job right now literally is to learn and to improve and to show growth. And sometimes that's going to happen on an accelerated pace, because this is, a business. It's not, no one is hiring someone for, a charitable goal of just giving them something. Like, you have to get something in return. And so it's recognizing I'm going to be humble, I'm going to be a sponge, and I'm going to be open, and I'm going to show what I can bring to the table.
So following up on that, real world examples, Amy, what is one mistake you made in the first 90 days that you learned most from?
So many. I will tell you, I will perfectly confess, because the other thing I will say is, if any of us sitting in more senior roles pretend that we haven't had failures, we're lying, right? I know there are some lawyers who want you to think they sprang like Zeus with the headache and then Athena popped out of his head fully formed, right? Like they sprang out as like the number one lawyer, and that's just not true. We all traveled our journey. So I was practicing immigration law, and I was a practicing immigration lawyer for the first 9 years of my career. And I really wanted to help my client, and I filed their petition for permanent residence too soon. And so it got denied because it was just statutorily I filed too soon, and their date wasn't up yet to where so that they could file. So it got denied, and this was several months down the road after I'd filed, right? And they're thinking they're in line, and my heart just sank, and I was like, how can I fix this without anyone knowing? Of course I couldn't. So I immediately prepped up another petition, and I did that before I even went to my boss. Like, I got the denial and I right away just pivoted and I prepped up another petition. And then I went to my boss, the owner of the firm, and I fessed up to what I had done, and I confessed why it had happened. And then the next call had to be to the client, and I confessed what I had done, and I confessed why it had happened. And I also was proactive in being like, I'm already going to fix it. I'm going to eat all of it. You will pay nothing. The firm has agreed to repay the filing fee. I will charge you no time. I will go with you to the interview for free. I will make this right. And they were gracious, and they rode that wave with me. And that happened probably my first year. And they rode that wave with me, and it was a lesson I will never forget. And the other lesson, and I'm not going to commandeer this conversation, I promise, but I have one more. And that is, my first year of practice, I hadn't even had my license a year. And an individual who was an immigrant who was serving time at the federal prison here in Colorado called and wanted to consult with me about some things. And I went out, I met with this person, we strategized a game plan, and then this person kept making requests. And I was like, look, I'm not doing this for free. I did not agree to take this as a pro bono case, so I'm going to need you to pay before I'll do anything further. And that person filed a 7-page complaint against me with the Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel, front and back, handwritten, 7 pages. It was the most terrifying thing in the world. Like, the ink was barely dry on my license. I just thought it was all going to hell in a handbasket. And when the regulation counsel lawyer called me to talk about it, she was so kind, and she was like, I want you to know there's nothing here, but I also want you to take from this the importance of, like, this can happen and you can't control that. So it's making sure you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's, so that if it happens, when it happens, you're ready for it. And I tell people, and I think they're lying, they think that I'm lying, but that was the single best thing that happened to me in my career, because it taught me the fragility of it. It taught me not to take anything for granted. And it was dismissed like that because it was junk, but it taught me that that I have a greater duty and a greater responsibility, and I have to take it seriously, or it could all go away. And so it actually was a really good thing. And then when I worked at the Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel myself, I approached complaints with that perspective, and with the understanding that I could convey the same things she conveyed to me. So yeah, those are two of my examples.
Emily, Katie, anything you've seen? Anything you want to add?
I think those were great examples.
Great. So what's a situation where asking a question early would have saved time or stress? You gave the example, Amy, that about recognizing the filing deadline. Anything else that the other two of you have seen?
I think Katie brought this up earlier, but it's really hard for assigning attorneys, I think, to anticipate how long something's going to take you to do. So I think just being comfortable to raise a red flag if you're several hours into something and you're nearing the time limit that they gave you and you're not done, to just come clean with that and say, this is taking me longer than you thought it would take me. Can we make sure I'm not going down a rabbit hole or that I'm on the wrong track? And I think that this is similar to the making a mistake conversation, that if you raise that flag earlier rather than later, I think that you can get counsel on how to proceed and not bill a bunch of hours that somebody then has to write off later potentially.
I guess I would also just add in there, especially coming from the firm perspective, questions about the organizational structure of how your firm works, or how does, for example, advancement work in my firm, or how does my time reflect in these metrics, sort of things. I think it's way better to understand those things up front than when you're 6 years down the line and you're trying to go up for partnership and you have just missed the mark on something that you could have understood earlier. So don't forget about those things too.
Because those are real. I mean, those are very real in the setting the two of you sit in.
Great. We've got time briefly for one last question. I'd like to ask, what's one recovery strategy when something goes wrong early in your career? Who'd like to go first?
I'll chime in here. I think we kind of already said it in relation to mistakes, but just own it when something like that happens, own it quickly, communicate about it, and then implement a strategy to prevent that from happening again, whatever that may be.
I think too, then, like, once you've gotten past it and you have fixed it, you have to move on from it. Don't let it be the thing that haunts you for the rest of your career. I think you just have to own that something went wrong and you fixed it and it's over and we're on to the next thing now.
Shake it off. In the words of T Swift, shake it off.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. What a great conversation. Our next event will be March 25th from 12 to 1, The Lawyer Who Knows the Law But Not Themselves. Registration can be found on our website. Thank you, our panelists, for your great conversation. Thank you, attendees. And a recording of this will be available on our social media channels later today. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.